I just want to go ahead and move forward to the second segment. I want to acknowledge we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, but we're going to move forward to the second segment, and I'm going to bring these questions back at the end of the second segment so we don't delay the whole event. So thank you so much for bearing with me. And I thank you all for the questions posed so far. So now I have the great honor to introduce my co-founder for Portulans Institute, Bruno Lanvin. He is the INSEAD's Executive Director for Global Indexes. In addition to being a co-founder of Portulans, he is also the founder and CEO of DL Partners SA, a Geneva-based consultancy, and the president of the Smart City Observatory. Since 2002, he has been co-authoring the Global Information Technology Report with Cornell and INSEAD, which now has been renewed as the NRI, and is currently the co-editor of the Global Innovation Index report, and also works on the Global Talent and Competitiveness Index report. So Bruno, I'm gonna pass the word to you for your presentation. I also wanna acknowledge and thank for the presence of Minister Your Excellence Anders Ygeman, who since 2019 serves as the Minister for Energy and Digital Development for Sweden, to soon comment on the NRI results. I'm gonna just share my screen here, 1 second.
Hello everyone. Hello, Your Excellency, Mr. Ygeman. It is my pleasure to release today the results of the latest edition of the Network Readiness Index, published under the title Accelerating Digital Transformation in a Post-COVID Global Economy. I will do that in the next 20 minutes or so by exploring 4 points. What is the Network Readiness Index? What are the rankings of NRI 2020? What do we mean by digital transformation? And finishing with the key messages emanating from this year's report. So let's start with point number 1. What is NRI? The NRI is a human-centric approach to information and communication technologies. The key metrics of the use of ICT for development and competitiveness are at the core of the index. That index is 20-year-old. It was launched in 2002 by the World Economic Forum as part of the Global Information Technology Report, GITR. It was redesigned in 2019 to make it more reflective of current ICT issues and make it more future-ready. NRI 2020 welcomes a new sponsor, STL, an industry-leading integrator of digital networks, and you heard STL CEO in the first part of this event. The NRI is first and foremost a model. The underlying principle of that model is that our collective future will require a harmonious integration of people on one side and technology on the other side. The model is based on 4 pillars: technology, people, governance, and impact. These 4 pillars are themselves distributed into sub-pillars, 12 in total, covering some 60 indicators. Point number 2, the rankings. This is what the press and media, and I'm sure all of you have been waiting for. So with no much further ado, let's go to who is at the top this year. The main rankings are the following. Among the 134 economies covered, the top 3 are Sweden, a big applause, followed by Denmark and Singapore. If you look at the top 10, which include Netherlands, Switzerland, Finland, Norway, United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom, these are all high-income countries. These countries continue to dominate the rankings, which is already an important message that needs to be looked into. If indeed we compare the NRI score, which is on the vertical axis, of this diagram that we call the NRI bubble chart. If you compare that to the GDP per capita, that is the wealth of countries, the horizontal axis, we see that there is a strong correlation. Basically, rich countries do better on NRI than poor countries. The colors indicate the income group. So at the top right, the blue countries are the high income countries, followed moving to the left by upper middle income countries. Then green is lower middle income, and at the far left of the diagram are the low income countries where you find most of the least developed economies. The black line is the regression line. That is, if you're above that line, it means that you perform better than what your GDP would suggest, and vice versa. If you are below the line, you could do better considering your income per capita. And what do we see? We see a clear distinction by income groups. However, we see also that there are a few blue countries that merge into the red and a few red countries that mix into the green and vice versa. So these limits are not irreversible. We also see that the two big demographies of this world, India and China, are both above the line. Both countries perform better than what their income per capita would suggest. So that is good news for emerging countries and developing countries in general. We have a multitude of examples of countries that are typically boxing above their weight. If we look at China, we see that China is indeed getting very close to some of the high-income countries included in this ranking. But there will be more lessons to draw from this data, as we will see later. If we look at the rankings per pillar, and I repeat that the four pillars are technology, people, governance, and impact, we see differences in the ranking. For instance, on technology, Switzerland is number 1, followed by Sweden and then the Netherlands. On people, it's Denmark, but Korea, which is farther away in terms of overall ranking, is the second one. In governance, we have clearly Western and Northern European countries filling the top ranks. Whereas on impact, we have Singapore, a leader, followed by Switzerland and then Sweden. If we look at performance by income group, we see that in the top quartile, that is the top 25% of the ranking, we have only high-income economies, which confirms the strong correlation underlined earlier. And where do these high-income economies dominate? It is primarily on pillars 1 and 3, that is technology and governance. If we look at the income group, we see that upper middle income countries are dominated by Malaysia, 34th in the overall ranking, followed by China, 40, and then Bulgaria, 46. If we look at lower middle income countries, Vietnam comes on top, followed by Ukraine and Moldova. And then if we look at the low income countries, Rwanda is leading, followed by Tajikistan and Uganda. So we see overall, looking at these three top groups of high income, upper middle income, and lower middle income, that Asia is strongly present. This again leads to some interesting conclusions in the report. By region, Africa trails all regions, especially in access and usage of ICTs, which remains a concern. Especially in the post-COVID environment, it is worth exploring the dimensions in which COVID has increased inequalities. The largest intra-regional variations are in Asia and Pacific region, but also in the Arab states and Africa. These are the regions where the distance between the top performer and the lowest performance is the greatest. In Africa, Mauritius is leading the pack, followed by South Africa and Kenya. In the Arab states, we have the UAE ahead of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but fairly close in the rankings, between 30 and 41. In Asia Pacific, Singapore is leading, Australia second, Korea third, and again fairly close to one another, between third and 14th. In the CIS, the former Soviet Republic and Eastern Europe, Russia is number 1, Armenia number 2, and Kazakhstan number 3. In Europe, we have already the top contenders, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands. And in the Americas, following the expected lead by the US, number 8, we have Canada number 13, and then we have to go pretty far down to find the third one, which is Uruguay at 47. So that leads us to looking at the theme of the report this year, that is digital transformation. Digital transformation is not only the subject of the report, but also of what we call the Transformation Dialogue series, which you can find on the Portulans website, which has been organized around a series of interviews with those who make digital transformation, whether they are political leaders, leaders of international organizations, of private companies, analysts and experts. They have very interesting views to share, and we try to summarize them in short interviews. And you have here some of the quotes gathered during those interviews. What are the key questions that the report suggests we should look into regarding digital transformation? Question number 1, how is digital transformation impacting global inequality? Number 2, is digital transformation leading to better lives? And number 3, are we controlling or being controlled by technology? The NRI provides us with a framework for analyzing the above those questions by putting the human technology dyad at the center of a global vision of digital transformation. This is the core of NRI, and we have not changed our line in terms of how the model is being articulated to address this type of questions and how the measurements have been geared to the idea of doing better in a number of areas where we can improve our responses to such questions. Which leads us to point number 4, the final point, the key messages emanating from this year's report. And we have tried to summarize those in 7 messages around digital transformation. The first one is that to be successful, digital transformation needs to be system-wide. By that we mean that if we look at the performance of the leaders, typically Sweden, as we shall hear in a few minutes from Mr. Ygeman, the leaders are performing highly on a majority, if not on all, of the 4 pillars of NRI. So it's not enough to be a champion in one area. Actually, Sweden is not a champion in any of the 4. It's important to have an equal performance and hopefully a high performance in all of the pillars. This is what system-wide means. You cannot neglect any aspect of digital transformation. Key message number 2, digital transformation may create new forms of digital divides. Clearly, digital transformation owes many promises about doing things better, about improving competitiveness, about improving the lives for many people. But it also holds the possibility of increasing digital divides. As we saw this year, the performance of Africa has become increasingly delinked from that of other regions. This should be a concern and needs to be addressed. Third, trust and security are central to successful digital transformation. Digital transformation is largely about using new tools. But how would you be able to encourage the use of new tools if citizens, businesses, and others don't trust them, if the advent of fake news, if the advent of breaches to privacy are increasing on the international level, trust and security are critically important to the development of e-commerce, of e-business, of e-government, but also to the development of telemedicine, e-learning, and everything which is at the core of national digital transformations. We need to fight cyber criminality, and we need to ensure that citizens and users feel secure whenever they move from the physical world to which they may have been accustomed to the digital world. Message number 4, COVID is accelerating digital transformation. This is obvious for most of us, at least those who are connected to a virtual event like the ones in which we are participating now, because we are among the people who know how to use the technologies and have made it a daily practice. That practice has increased with COVID, where social distancing and new ways of working have encouraged the use of digital tools. Teleconferencing, teleworking are now part of our lives, and they're not going to go away when the virus goes away. So we have an acceleration which has pushed the limit to what many of us thought would be possible. Number 5, education and reskilling are critically important for successful and sustainable digital transformation. We saw in the middle of the COVID crisis that there were inequalities in terms of who would be qualified to work from home and who would still have to go physically to work, to attend equipment, to perform a number of functions that could not be performed remotely. This has been seen by many as inequalities at work. Education and reskilling will be critically important for addressing this inequality, to giving everybody the skills needed to take full advantage of the digital tools available. This is where a number of areas, including artificial intelligence, should be seen as critical for the reshaping of our education and lifelong learning strategies. Message number 6, digital transformation can help the accelerated implementation of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Clearly, a number of global challenges can be better addressed if we make intelligent use of technological tools and collaborative ways of working. This is not just about climate change. It is also about reducing poverty, about encouraging sustainable ways to develop economies in a balanced way, in an open ways. These are areas where, again, digital can make a strong difference. Last but not least of the key messages is number 7. Digital transformation can help rebuild global cooperation and redefine globalization. COVID has accelerated our rethinking about what good should look like. We've seen a number of tendencies to retrench to protectionist policies and sometimes to nationalistic policies. We know that globalization has led to some excesses, in particular to increased inequalities within national economies, and all these need to be addressed. COVID has been an accelerator in our rethinking. Digital transformation can help in that process. It can help restore confidence, trust between nation states, between cities, between citizens. It can help restore a climate of cooperation in research, in innovation, for example, around finding a vaccine that would be accessible to everybody to fight the COVID virus, it can help redefine globalization, because it's clear that the future of globalization rests with the ability to go beyond the traditional limits of nation states, to make cities cooperate among themselves, to make citizens, universities, businesses cooperate across borders. And this is an area where digital transformation will be critically important for the future. Thank you for your attention. This is all I wanted to say to introduce the report this year. Back to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Bruno. That was wonderful and very complete. And for all our attendees, the Network Readiness Index website is now available, and you can download the complete report and data set from our website. We do have an external audit process that is also going to be available in our website. So I have the honor again to give the floor to Highness Minister Anders Ygeman, who since 2019 served as a Minister for Energy and Digital Development for Sweden. So as Bruno likes to put it, what is this secret recipe for all the wonderful results Sweden has achieved this year and past years?
Thank you, Carolina. I don't think there's really a secret recipe. I think your report outlines the recipe quite well for being top ranked. And I'd like to start by thank you for inviting me here, and thank you very much for the honor of Sweden being ranked #1 in the NRI report. For me as a minister, it's of course pleasing to get this acknowledgement of our work. As a government, we have put much effort into making reality of our vision that Sweden should be world leading in harnessing the benefits of digitalization. I see this award as an indicator of that we are at least doing something right. So why is Sweden performing well when it comes to digital solutions? Maybe part of the answer is that we have a lot to benefit from it. We are a small export-driven economy. We are a geographically large country, and we have a fairly small population. Digital solutions help us to overcome some of the challenges and make geographical distance less relevant. But I'm sure that part of the explanation is also the firm commitment from the government, municipalities, and the Swedish industry to be front runners. The government has spent much resources to make sure that fast broadband connection is available whether you live in a city or not. We keep assigning funds for this purpose, and will do so until our goals has been reached. We are also working hard to make sure that the legislation is supporting innovation and not stopping it. Much of our legislation was written in a time when computers did not even exist. Requirements then seen as natural now raise unnecessary barriers for digital solutions. Then we must act fast to update the laws to fit the world we now live in. The Swedish population expect digital solutions to manage their everyday matters, and legislations should not be in the way. It would be strange to be here today and not mention the situation we all share at this moment. The world is facing a tremendous challenge in managing the spread of COVID, and we see consequences for all sectors of society. There are many people, especially elders, who have lived in isolation for months now. And I really understand their wish to see an end to restrictions and limitations. But we are still not through the pandemic, and much more effort will be needed by both individuals and societies to get us through this. And when we now see worrying figures of increasing spread in many countries, we need to be even to stop the virus from reaching those who are most vulnerable. But we must at the same time try to see some of the positive outcomes that may come out of this crisis. The pandemic has become a driver of change, and I dare to say that in some areas we have in a few months taken steps that otherwise would have taken many years. In Sweden, schools managed to prepare for distance schooling in just a few weeks. Companies shifted to distance work just as rapidly. And the healthcare system has adapted in an impressive way. Now we must make sure to hold on to these gains. Once the pandemic is over, it will be very tempting to go back to the old solutions and do things the way we always have. But we need to ask ourselves, is it necessary with all the traveling and meetings? How can we make digital solutions an integrated part of our welfare? And how can we make sure that everyone is included, regardless of age, income, disabilities, or where they live? These are, of course, difficult questions, but part of the answer lies in what we are already doing. We need to look at the positive examples that already exist. In one Swedish municipality, an AI is used for managing the social welfare, reducing the process time from 1 week to 1 day with less staff. And since the time saved could be used for helping the clients with work training and education, the number of people that went from living on welfare to being employed, getting a job, rose by 200% at the same time. In a hospital in Stockholm, radiologists have created an AI that can analyze X-rays image to identify fractures. For the patient, this means more time with the doctor and more secure diagnosis at the same time. And now, during the pandemic, we have seen perhaps some of the most impressive examples of all. This year, more than 400 individuals in Sweden, aged 100 years or more, have met with a doctor online to get access to healthcare without being exposed to the risk for infection. Digital solutions are no longer for early adopters only. Now everyone should be included. These are positive examples that we should spread and learn from. But it will take political will and effort to make it become more than isolated islands of innovation. To sum up, I want to underline that more needs to be done, also in Sweden. We are performing well in many rankings, but there is always room for improvement, not least when it comes to access to data and sharing information. Sweden has a strong tradition of gathering long time series statistics and keeping registries that give us large amount of data. But we have not been good enough at making that information easily accessible and possible to process. One of my main priorities is therefore to change the Swedish regulation on data access and make more information accessible for free. I think that is necessary for developing the next generation of effective AI solutions. Lastly, I want to say that we need to share the good examples and give the credits to those who take the risk of being first. Decision makers who are brave and try new ways of working should be encouraged. And when these new ways fails, which they will of course sometimes do, we should not put blame on the front runners, but instead be grateful that someone at least tried and encourage them and others to try again. Once again, thank you for this. Really much thank you for this.
Thank you, Minister. Bruno?
Yes, I want also to thank most warmly Mr. Ygeman for being with us today and for sharing what we shall not call the secret recipe, but I cannot refrain from noting that Mr. Ygeman gave us a great lesson in modesty by saying, yes, we are number one, but there's a number of areas in which we know that we can improve. And my own experience of true champions is that they are the ones who are ready to discuss failures, shortcomings, things that remain to be done. And I think this is very much the spirit about NRI. It is not about naming and shaming. Of course, we are happy to have a champion and we congratulate Sweden again, but basically NRI is a global exercise. So it is there to have a meaning for the least well-ranked among the 134 economies. It has to have a message of optimism and a message for action by the private sector, by the public sector, by all of us to improve the way in which technology can make our lives better. So thank you again, Mr. Ygeman. I believe, Carolina, that we have a few questions in the pipeline, so I turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, Bruno. I just want to make sure that Anand or Demi or Soumitra, if you want to comment anything on the NRI, otherwise we can move to the Q&A. Okay, so Demi? Okay, so let's move to the Q&A. I think one of the great questions that has appeared here before is who will finance everything, right? We have discussed that there are so many needs, so many challenges, but who will finance all this work? Bruno, may I start with you?
Yes, generally the answer to the question of that kind, who will finance, is generally people pointing fingers saying he will finance or she will finance. Typically, these are areas where we've seen in the past many players on the public sector saying the private sector has to play their role. And we've seen the private sector saying we need public investment in a number of areas. And clearly, of course, success is always a mixture of both. But we have to look at what the consequences of COVID will be as well. Trying to think about what will be the world economy after COVID. You know, even if, as Dorothy says, and I totally agree, the virus is going to be with us for a long, long time, we have undergone a shock. And we know that the rethinking that has been going on will translate into new ways of doing business, new ways of trading, new ways of learning, new ways of interacting. So who will finance has to go very much with the issue of who will benefit. And the recovery packages we've seen bear some indications on that. The European package, for instance, which is balancing the green aspect and the digital aspect, is an indication. It has not been fully accepted yet, but it gives an indication of why digital is so critically important to shape the post-COVID economy. If that is the context, we already have part of the answer. Public deficits will finance a large part of digital transformation. So that's a bet on future generation. It's a bet on the future. It is a message of optimism to a large extent. But we also know, and we heard it from Anand before, that the private sector is ready to play their role. They are ready to step in. Of course, they need the ROI. Of course, they need to care about the bottom line. But there are ways to both stimulate digital transformation and serve the purpose that younger generations are after. The younger generations want to contribute to an economy that makes sense. And for that, the private sector has realized that it also has part of the responsibilities to accept.
Thank you.
So altogether, the financing will continue to be a combination of public and private money. It is linked to the financing of innovation. The latest report on innovation, the Global Innovation Index that Soumitra and I presented a few weeks ago, was about who will finance innovation. So the whole message about who will finance digital transformation is sending back to that overall message.
Thank you, Bruno, so much. Minister Ygeman, could you comment on that, please? Sorry, Minister, you are on mute.
So I will answer that in maybe a little bit different way that Bruno did, even if I agree with him. I mean, we finance old analog technique today, and this technique could be much more cost effective. I take just a few examples. Sweden is one of the countries in the world, I think, that use email the most. It's a fairly old technique, email. Still, in Sweden, only the governmental sector pays 200 million euros on sending physical mails. We don't need to send any of those. It's just the cost, and we can use this to invest. And this is in Sweden. If you look at other countries in the report, you will see that they use far more money for this. Same goes for digital signatures on paper that we send from each other back and forth, back and forth. Who's going to pay for that? In the Baltic states, it's compulsory with an EID to identify yourself electrically. I met with one of the finance ministers who said that this has saved them 2% of the GDP. 2% of the GDP. So I would say that keeping from doing this investments will be a far greater cost than doing these investments. And you should, of course, start with those investments that have a short payoff that can help to pay for other investments, so you get more effective and keep ahead.
Thank you so much. And Sasha, I would love to bring this question to you, but I want to add, I think, a complementary question that came through the Q&A. A dear friend of mine, Aleado, here with me a long time ago, helped found the Open Knowledge Foundation many years ago in Brazil. So he brings the issue of decentralization and empowering community-driven connectivity and innovation, right? So we are talking about traditional ways of financing until now, but who should be financing all this, but also what is the role of the community-driven innovation and potentially even financing, or adding to that the role of open source and open technology in general.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Just to start, as it concerns your first part of the question with regards to financing, Minister Ygeman, I really appreciate what you said in your intervention, where you highlighted the need for legislative frameworks that keep up with the pace of innovation. And here I would add that we also need financing frameworks that equally keep up with the pace of innovation. So we need to reimagine the ways in which public-private partnerships, but also multi-stakeholder partnerships can be part of the implementation of this inclusive and diverse transformation. So there are new ways of financing that are possible. And here I would also like to underline, and it's one of the pillars that you evoked, Bruno, in the NRI, that it's not just about money, it's also about people. And this is where, again, the questions of digital literacy and training, but also investment in the startup ecosystem through favorable public policies that you again underlined, Minister Ygeman, in your intervention, that retain talent and that promote the talent that it leads to inclusive digital transformation. So this, from the perspective of UNESCO, is absolutely essential. How can we use the possibilities that are present in digital transformation to put people at the heart of this transformation and to ensure multi-stakeholder partnerships, so that it's not just, in fact, the public sector and the private sector, but in fact the technical community, academia, the media, and civil society equally around the table discussing implementation partnerships that are, again, not just about the money, but also about the people. And here it leads me to the second aspect of your question, Carolina, which is the question of decentralization and empowering the role of local communities. And UNESCO most recently has been working, just as a very concrete example, with a foundation called Innovation for Policy Foundation, which is based in Rwanda, but that regroups more than 45 innovation hubs across the African continent, looking at how to develop and support not only participatory public policies related to innovation and digital transformation, but also partnerships and coalitions for the necessary work that needs to be done for the different pillars of digital transformation. And this has led very concretely to a new legislative framework, such as the Startup Act in Senegal, but also new processes related to procurement processes that otherwise excluded women and youth, specifically in countries like Rwanda. So there are examples here that show the power of decentralizing standards and legislative frameworks based on universal principles like human rights, but to the local context, and the need to take into consideration, as Anand said in his presentation in the first part, the local context and local challenges that need to be addressed, both in the legislative development of public policies, but also in the programmatic implementations of programs that favor and support digital transformation. And then the last part of your question, Carolina, which is at the heart of our work at UNESCO, is the role of open source. And this is something that I evoked in the first part of my presentation, looking specifically at questions related to how can we promote a digital transformation that supports the very important work, for example, of Creative Commons, of open educational resources, of open access to scientific information, and open access more broadly. And for us, we see this as absolutely essential. You also mentioned, Minister Ygeman, that you would be also further opening up access to data at the country level, and Demi, you evoked this as well. And for us, the question of global data commons, as well as AI commons, are absolutely key in order to ensure an inclusive digital transformation where all stakeholders are involved around the table. So the question of openness for us is at the heart of sustainable digital transformation, because as many people underlined in the beginning part of this dialogue, in order to ensure digital transformation, we need data-driven public policies. And in order to have this data, we need measurement and statistics based on open access to information. So for us, from UNESCO's perspective, digital transformation and the promotion of open access are indissociable.
Sasha, I couldn't agree more. You're making me even emotional here right now, because since early on in my career, those are the things I was working on: Creative Commons, open access. And one of the things I worked a lot in Brazil, and Dorothy, we may have crossed paths there, and Demi was joined there with me, was on open educational resources, because it doesn't matter that you have computers arriving at schools if the kids from minorities or regions that are not in the urban centers cannot really appropriate that knowledge, right? I used to hear a lot the folks from indigenous tribes in the Amazon saying, I don't want to hear about examples from São Paulo, I want to hear about examples from my region, right? So really appropriating that digital content has its own is a very important part to make that access to internet relevant, right? Which is also part of what we were discussing earlier on meaningful connectivity, right? It goes beyond the technology. So on that note, Anand, if I can bring you one of the questions from our Q&A, which is related to this. So it's Ravi Kumar. He says, thanks for the insights from the eminent panelists. My question is, all the digital transformation adoption and implementation is happening rapidly due to the pandemic to avoid the less human intervention to survive and thrive. But what will happen after the pandemic is over, right? We see a lot of good efforts and even a lot of donations from private companies, but how are we gonna make, as Sasha was saying, sustainable in the long run?
Absolutely. So that's something that, like, I think both the impact of this digital transformation that people are seeing, and as Minister Ygeman also pointed out, whether it is distant education, distance working, or distance healthcare, the impact that people are seeing, it becomes the responsibility of all the leaders, whether in private sector or in public sector, to realize that and make this long lasting in terms of ensuring that the digital, when you are asking the question about who's going to pay for it, we have to realize the fact also that it is about delivery of many newer applications very, very efficiently. And that efficiency is being recognized across sectors, across areas. I mean, the example that you gave, that distance education or work from home is in some way resolving a lot of issues, whether it is about migration to cities from smaller towns or villages, about issues of people moving from towns towards cities for education. And some of these things, I don't see the overall, it's going to overall go back to where it was pre-COVID. So I see that there would be a lot of the good initiatives that have happened, maybe albeit forcefully. And what we spoke about, that it is not only the early adopters who are kind of taking on the digital technologies, but it is the larger ecosystem who's taking on the digital technologies, and with the right skilling, making sure that we move the critical mass towards people who are actually witnessing the impact of that. And clearly the responsibility is on all of us who are actually seeing the efficiency impact of digitalization for delivery of whether it is physical mails or education or governance, towards making sure that all the good parts which have happened, we sustain that and we don't allow that to go back to what it was pre-pandemic.
Thank you, Anand. So I would just like to invite some of you for final comments, and then we can close our event today. Dorothy, would you like to comment? Any final comments, please?
Thank you, Carolina. I just want to say that with rapid digitization, we actually see inequality being accentuated. That is the inequalities we had before COVID that made it difficult for people to actually fulfill the potential of the digital age. These have grown worse as a result of rapid digitization. And we have a lot of research around this phenomenon, and unfortunately we can see it live happening. And so we have a huge challenge to correct that. You know, I'll be very interested to read more about, let's say I'm looking forward to next year's report so that we will be able to see what happened. But we know what is happening right now, and we have to figure how to fix that. And so the discussion that you were having on financing and new models is very important for me. And the discussion around communities, for me, when we talk community, we are talking about communities taking back control over their key asset, which is their data and their content. And we have models for that today as well. And let me just end by saying that Creative Commons is having its global summit this week. So once we leave here, we will all head off to the CC summit. Thank you.
Wonderful, yes. Soumitra, do you have any comments, final comments?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I enjoyed the presentation and the comments, and thank you, Minister Ygeman, for joining us and for your very insightful comments about Sweden. I just wanted to leave the panel and also the audience with the thought about what is at the heart of the new NRI. And the real core of the NRI is that we have to be able to combine people and technology effectively together under a good governance structure to have the right impacts on quality of life, economic benefits, and very important, the environment, SDG goals. So this notion of combining people and technology together is critical. I think historically we have tended to focus a little bit more on technology because technology has progressed very rapidly. But I think we have to start focusing on bringing the people dimension into the equation much more explicitly, especially as AI, other technologies come together. And we have to realize that current systems do not probably account for the right governance. If you leave it to the tech companies with the governance, they will probably fail. Government's not doing enough. So we have to look at that governance system of bringing the two together. And I hope that this is something that we'll all collectively focus on in the future.
Thank you. Demi, can I give you a minute for final comments?
Thank you, Carolina. Really was a very good meeting, exciting meeting. We are thrilled to hear a lot of opinion, very, very good suggestions and counsels on that. Just to begin with the Creative Commons, I agree totally that internet and the open source is a kind of symbiosis from the very beginning. The internet helped to develop open source in every place in the world. And in the other hand, internet was built upon open source. And it's very important to keep the things open, the software and also the information. It's very important to have the information open. As for the NRI, we have a lot of material to read. I am very thrilled about the 4 pillars that are used to construct the NRI indicators. And we have to read this with carefully. And I think we have a lot of work to do based on what we read. And my hope is that we can continue to rely on these indexes, and this is a large scale work that have to be continuous. And again, thank you very much for the meeting. It was very useful for us, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Demi. I really appreciate, and I agree. As Bruno mentioned before, this is an important assessment tool to really help, and that's our hope, to help countries think about the path forward in a way that's data-based, data where our data informs policymaking. Minister, please, your last comments. You're mute.
Always this mute button. No, but I think this has been a really interesting debate. I really share the views of Soumitra that we have to. Digitalization is very much about people and not that much about technology. And I think that COVID-19 has made that very clear. We had a lot of the technologies before, but it was through the COVID-19 and the stress that it gave us that made it possible to develop even more. And we could take use of this technology that we already had. And I think that getting the skills to the people and reskilling people to be able to use all the technology that actually is available will be one of the key aspects to work with. And also, as I mentioned in the speech, doing more of the public data useful to companies or to citizens. I work on a proposal now to make all public data that we have in municipalities, regions, and states available digital, and being available digitally in a format that can be used. And even the real-time data that is used in the parking or public sector or whatever. And I think that this will lead to another step in the development and lead to services that we haven't seen yet. I hope, at least.
Thank you. Bruno, I would like to give you a minute, and then we can conclude with Sasha, who is our partner in hosting this webinar.
Yes, very quickly, I enjoy very much the discussion, and I see three words that have been mentioned by the panelists and the minister, which I think should stay with us. Gender, openness, youth. Gender balance is clearly important in the ICT world, in the technology world, because we see girls performing better than boys, including in Europe, including in Scandinavian countries, which have been a model in that area, performing better in STEM studies and still being a minority in the ICT world. So we have more to do in terms of jobs and in terms of leadership in the ICT sector. Second, openness. It's not just open source, it's not just open borders, it is open mind. Digital gives us new opportunities for collaboration. We need to be open to other cultures and other ways of seeing the world. And last but not least, youth. The NRI aims at being an index for future readiness. The future is about young people. We need to involve them, and one way in which digital can help is that it can make the appetite for the future grow among younger generation. So if we can generate appetite for the future, we will have done our job properly.
Thank you, Bruno. And Anand, can I give you 1 minute? And I want to thank you again for being the knowledge partner for this year.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here, and it was really great discussion on all aspects. I really like the balance between the NRI report this time, which is having clear emphasis on technology and people and impact and governance. And all of us have to responsibly make sure that digitization does not lead to higher inequalities. So we are still, I would say, in a large part of the world getting into the first stages of digitization, real life applications coming on the digital platform, and we have to be very, very responsibly make sure that it actually does the reverse. And the discussions like this with the right ecosystem is definitely will take us there. I still believe that right now it's a great opportunity for us towards actually reducing the inequalities, and I truly believe that digital is a force towards efficient delivery of many utilitarian applications, and all of us together have to play a role towards doing that.
Thank you, Anand. Sasha, please, your final comments.
Thank you very much, Carolina. I would first just very briefly like to reflect on something that Bruno said, and it keeps on coming up as it concerns gender equality in particularly the digital sphere. Recently, UNESCO in our publication, I Blush If I Could, identified what we call the ICT gender equality paradox, which finds that countries with the highest level of gender equality often, for example, in Europe, also have the lowest proportions of women pursuing advanced degrees in computer science and related subjects. And conversely, countries with lower levels of gender equality, such as those in the Arab region, have the highest proportions of women completing advanced technology degrees. So that means very concretely that in Belgium, only 6% of ICT graduates are women, while in the United Arab Emirates, this figure is 58%. I think this is important to highlight for one of my major points as part of my concluding remarks, is that the NRI has highlighted that high income countries are correlated with a high ranking for the most part in the NRI index. High gender equality is often also associated with high income countries. So what we see with the ICT gender equality paradox is that it's in fact countries that have less gender equality that have more women participating in STEM. Why do I think that this is an important point to end on? Because I think there is an essential aspect here that needs to be underlined, which is what are the innovations that are coming out of the global south in the field of digital transformation, particularly in the era of COVID, that we can learn from, including in the global north. And here, this is one of the things that I would like to highlight, is the need to change the narrative around innovation coming from technology-intense countries and being transferred or translated into less technology-intense countries. When we look at, for example, that the Google AI Center is led by Mustafa Cissé, is based in Accra, where Dorothy is currently speaking to us from, or where some of the most incredible innovations responding to COVID-19, harnessing digital solutions is coming from, like Kenya, like Nigeria, like Rwanda. There is work to be done, and this is absolutely necessary to change the narrative around innovation in the global south. And this is something that UNESCO is extremely committed to and will continue to put at the heart of our agenda. If I had a couple of words similarly to what Bruno did to close this conversation, I would say, echoing my earlier presentation, the need to connect, protect, respect, and remedy, with 4 main points. 1, again, we need a digital transformation based on human rights. Technology is not neutral, and it is not a mirror. Technology is a magnifier of existing inequalities. And we see that in, for example, algorithmic bias in facial recognition. It means the data sets are biased. It means the people developing the data sets are biased. And it means that we need to ensure opportunities for remedy. This is an amazing opportunity, not only to change our technology, but also to change our communities. So let us not let this opportunity go to waste through the fact that technology is magnifying existing inequalities. If we have a digital transformation that is inclusive and diverse and based on human rights, we will see its impact not only in the tools that we use, but also in our everyday life. The second aspect, we need a digital transformation that has openness at its heart. If data is the lifeblood of democracy, then it must be open. Echoing again what Demi said, we cannot change what we can't measure. So we need to develop, through open access to data, policies that are driven by practice, not practice driven just by policies. And here, this is where a feedback loop that, again, Minister Ygeman underlined the need to have policies that keep up with innovation and legislative frameworks that are as fast developed as the innovation sector is particularly important. We cannot have a top-down approach in a world where digital transformation and innovation is developing at a speed that is astronomical. We need feedback loops that ensure we have a bottom-up but also top-down approach, so that we are driven by local realities and we are driven by practice. Third aspect, we need meaningful connection. And in this regard, we need to invest in research and digital literacy. And lastly, we need multi-stakeholder shaped policies and programs for digital transformation, because the digital future will be co-created or will not have an impact.
Thank you, Sasha. That was incredible. And I want to thank you again for all your cooperation in putting this global event together, but also the upcoming regional spotlights. So I just want to conclude this event today to say thank you so much. I'm going to say in the order that you guys appear in my screen. So thank you, Minister Anders Ygeman. Thank you, Soumitra. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Demi. And thank you, Sasha. I really enjoy our discussion today. This video is going to be available later in our website. And for all the attendees that have joined us today, thank you so much for your time and your questions. And please join us later in the regional spotlights, where we're going to have incredible high-level experts from all the regions around the world joining us in the next 2 weeks. We're going to have events spread around 2-3 weeks, and also later in November. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina, for the excellent moderation.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.